So I wanted to point out, here we are standing underneath our frontier elm. And if we look around, you can see this is planted in just absolute, like the least natural, worst planting environment pretty much you can get. So we have asphalt all the way around the tree. We have just a small raised bed, just a small island here with, I assume, halfway decent soil in it. But I know there's gravel underneath this and everything else. And this elm was planted just 6 years ago. So, I mean, if I stand by this tree, you can kind of get an idea of how big the trunk is. It's easily 18 inches across down at the base, perhaps a little bit larger. It was only about 3 inches in trunk diameter when we planted it. So in 6 years, in a terrible planting location, and believe me, there's no irrigation out here. We don't fertilize this tree. We put our normal root stimulant in the ground when we planted it, which is what we do with every tree we plant. And aside from that, it has basically gotten zero care. I'm sure the first year we probably filled a water bag a couple of times. That's probably the best it's got. But this tree has grown from a 3-inch trunk diameter to an 18-ish inch trunk diameter. It's as tall as the light pole that is also located in this parking lot island. So it's 30-ish feet tall, and it is providing a great deal of shade. They are fast-growing, they're hardy. All of the elm trees that we're selling nowadays are Dutch elm disease resistant. So Dutch elm disease, for those of you that don't know, don't remember, or maybe weren't even born then, I wasn't. When Dutch elm disease came about, really wiped the elm trees out in our area in the Chicagoland suburbs, and Chicago proper, like in the 50s and 60s, basically. We had elm-lined streets. I've seen pictures. I've never seen them. And it just wiped out all of the American elm that we used to have around here. Beautiful, beautiful trees. And so then for a long time we had no elm trees. There's been some breeding efforts at Morton Arboretum as well as a bunch of other places to breed Dutch elm disease resistance. Most of those efforts were led by a guy named Dr. George Ware. He's now since passed on, but his legacy is this right here. Trees like this, beautiful, hardy, Dutch elm disease resistant, and exceptionally fast growing. So I really like the elm trees. This particular one is Frontier, which kind of has a nice sort of purple or burgundy fall color. Most of the elms just turn yellow. This one has kind of a nice burgundy color in the fall. They're not flowering trees, and they're not huge yet, but I wanted to talk a little bit about the beech over here, because these are right at the top of my list for some of my favorite trees. They are a little slower to establish, but once they get going, they're relatively fast-growing. We have a couple of beautiful ones planted here at the garden center. I was fortunate. The home that we bought 5 years ago has 2 big 30-year-old, 35-year-old tricolor beech. So this is tricolor beech right here. We also have purple beech, and I think we still have some green beech. But so these are European beech. They are very well suited to growing in our area. They do very well here, and they're relatively pest-free. Really don't have a lot of disease or insect issues. Once you get the tree established, once you make it past that first year, they tend to live for a very, very long time. I was just at a home 2 days ago that has a large beech that was planted in the early 50s. So, it's over 70 years or about 70 years old right now. I don't think 2 or 3 grown adults could put their arms around the trunk of this tree. The bark looks like the skin of an elephant. It's all like gray silver, kind of very smooth, but got wrinkles and bumps in it. It's just a really, really cool tree. All of the European beech will do that. Tricolor is known for this sort of multicolored leaf here. So you get like burgundies and pinks and usually a little bit of cream color in there. So just gorgeous coloring. This is not a flowering tree, but the color on this is just fantastic. Usually it'll be at its brightest in late May and June. And then by the time summer rolls around, it starts to darken up a little bit. And then eventually, if it gets a lot of sun, you may notice a little bit of crisp edges. I'll just kind of show you here, kind of right there by my finger. The crispy edges is just because of the heat and sun. A well-established tree you won't see nearly as much as you will on a younger tree like this. Absolutely nothing to worry about. This is what we would call scorch, which is just basically a term for heat stress. Sometimes it's because of heat, sometimes it's because of dryness, sometimes it's just because of inconsistent watering. When you have a young tree, it doesn't have a well-developed root system yet, and so those swings in soil moisture levels, you know, it's really wet because it just got watered, it's really dry because it's hot out and it used up all that water. You know, it's that type of thing that can cause scorch, but it's just an aesthetic issue, assuming it doesn't get too bad, and really isn't a big deal for the tree. I wanted to point out the catalpa trees because this is actually going to be the next addition to my home landscape is a catalpa. So right here we actually have, I think all of these, it's bright sunny, all of these are purple catalpa. So the purple catalpa, the tree leaves come out burgundy, and then after when they're, I don't know, 3 to 5 weeks old, they slowly start turning green. So I know it's very hard to see because these are very large trees, but right now the new growth tips on this tree are burgundy, but the rest of the leaves are green, so it gives it sort of a cool two-tone, sort of bicolored look. In the spring, the whole tree was purple. And then in the summer, you're going to get that bicolor, mostly green with new growth tips all around the outside that are going to be purple. And then they bloom in June. So these are actually just finishing their bloom cycle. I'm not sure how well you can see the flowers there, but they get large clusters, like it's a large cone-shaped cluster. We'll post some photos of these too. Large cone-shaped clusters of white orchid-like flowers is the best way I could describe it. It's a very large tree. In fact, across the street in the forest preserve, almost within eyesight here, but it's just on the other side of these trees, is a very, very large old catalpa that's probably 75 feet tall. Huge old tree. When it's in bloom, it's absolutely magnificent. And it's also a later blooming tree, which is cool because all of those typical flowering trees, the redbuds and magnolias and crabapples and such, they bloom so early in the year, and then here we are in June, and you've got the catalpa blooming. So really a very cool tree. Big, big leaves, great amount of shade, and very fast growing. So really an excellent shade tree. In the home landscape, they're probably going to get around 50 feet tall. In a natural, forest preserve type setting, you may get 60 to 75 feet. But really fast growing, very hardy, and also tolerant of really crummy soil. So if you've got rocky, gravelly soil or just heavier clay, things like that, the catalpa is really tolerant of that. So that would be a really good shade tree for you. Right here we're standing underneath a swamp white oak, which is one of my favorites. It's an easy go-to if you know you want an oak in your yard and you're not sure what variety to pick. Pick swamp white oak. You can literally plant it anywhere. It can take dry soil. It is exceptionally drought tolerant, but as the name suggests, swamp white oak, it is tolerant of very low-lying areas. So you can put this in a lower, wetter area, the back corner of the yard where when it rains the water may pool or sit or run through there for a little longer. It's not going to be an issue. If it's a high, dry spot, it's going to be perfectly fine. I've seen this doing exceptionally well on parkways, but as I mentioned, if it's a low-lying, fertile, more wet area, they're going to do just fine. They have... They get their name, they're part of the white oak family. The backside of the leaf, not so much on these younger ones, the backside of the leaf is going to be kind of white and fuzzy, and the top will be dark green once it's healthy and well established. We have a beautiful one planted here in the garden center. It's planted in rocks and gravel and garbage, and it is absolutely gorgeous. It's 30, 35 feet tall, big healthy trunk, gorgeous dark green leaves with the fuzzy white underside. And then it also has a real interesting sort of exfoliating bark. So it's a great four-season tree. It's tough as nails. It's very disease-resistant. Really high on my list. That's the swamp white oak. In the landscape, they're going to be kind of an oval-shaped tree, about 40-ish feet tall by about 25-ish wide. That's kind of a good average landscape size. Of course, they can get larger than that in time. But, I generally try to base my size my approximate size is based on the fact that trees in a subdivision or in a residential landscape area are not going to be as big or large as they would, say, at Morton Arboretum or at the Campton Forest Preserve across the street here. You know, trees in those areas with good growing conditions and lots of other trees around them are going to be able to grow larger and faster than trees planted in a lawn with lawn grass all around it, where the soil has been scraped off, things like that. So my size recommendations are based on our area and our growing conditions. This is Chinkapin Oak. The reason I mentioned Chinkapin Oak is some oaks can be, I guess, prone to, like pin oak, for instance, is prone to a nutrient deficiency problem called chlorosis. Chlorosis is basically an iron deficiency. Pin oaks are not very well suited to our area, and because we have a very high alkaline soil here, so we've got a higher pH, and that tree would like a much lower pH. And if we have high pH soils, then iron and other elements are not available to the tree, and so you end up with these nutrient deficiency problems. But if you've ever had problems with river birch, red maple, pin oak, things like that, and that develop chlorosis, this would be a wonderful tree for you. This is Chinkapin Oak. It has a really cool, much smaller, narrower leaf than most oak trees, more tooth edges than most oak trees. Almost looks like a chestnut. If you've ever seen a chestnut tree, this is really similar to what the chestnut leaves look like. But here is our Chinkapin Oak. Absolutely gorgeous tree, fast growing. Again, oaks get a bad rap for being slow growing. They really aren't. Chinkapin Oak is another one that you could grow as a great parkway tree. It would be really good in rocky, gravelly ground. So this is an oak called Street Spire, and it's going to get about 30 to 40 feet tall and about 10 to 12-ish feet wide. This is a very good tree. It's a very good replacement for the Chanticleer pear that I was talking about before. So Chanticleer pear would get about 35 to 40 feet tall and about 15 feet wide. It keeps a very tight, upright profile. Street Spire Oak keeps a very similar shape and size. This happens to be a lower branch tree, so you can see we only have about a foot or so of clear trunk before the branches start, but that can easily be trimmed up if you want a more traditional single trunk and then canopy, or you can leave it branched all the way down here, closer to the ground like this. Either way, it makes a beautiful tree. There are a bunch of columnar oak trees like this: Street Spire, Regal Prince, Kindred Spirit, Crimson Spire. They're all very well suited to our area. Really neat trees, and they don't take up a lot of space. So if you have a taller home, or you're looking for kind of a narrow row where it's not going to take up a lot of yard space, this is a great tree for you. If you're looking for that tree at the corner of the house, maybe you're replacing a pear tree, that would be a really good choice, because you only need to put it 5 to maybe 7 to 8 feet away from the house is a really suitable planting location for an oak like this. So really a great group of trees here, the oak trees. So I wanted to show you one of our smaller shade trees because it's one of my favorites, and it's probably the best fall coloring tree that we carry. This is a tree called a Sourgum or black tupelo or black gum. So it goes by a bunch of different common names. Its botanical name is Nyssa sylvatica. So this tree has these beautiful, very glossy green leaves. So you can see here in the middle of summer here, we're, the 2nd of July, I guess. And, these leaves are just glossy green and dark. They're not showing the signs or effects of the heat in the summer, so it holds up really well. In the fall, they will turn bright, and I mean like really bright reds and oranges, maybe just a tinge of yellow in there. Almost looks like the tree is on fire. So really cool tree, faster, medium to fast growth rate. I'd say medium. You're probably going to get 12-ish inches a year out of this tree. So not slow, but not fast. And it can grow in full sun to partial shade, and it's going to get about 30 feet tall. So it's not a huge tree. If you're looking for something a little smaller in the landscape, maybe 25 feet, these are going to be a really good choice. So I wanted to point out this tree over here because we do get some people coming in sometimes asking for sycamores. And this is actually a European plane tree. So this is called Exclamation. It's basically the cousin of the American sycamore. They look almost identical. Literally, they're very, very difficult to tell apart. The reason that we grow the European plane tree instead of the American sycamore is that the American sycamore is very prone to a leaf disease called anthracnose. Very, very pretty tree, exceptionally fast growing. Very tolerant of wet locations. Down along Mill Creek near the Fox River, you'll find Native American sycamores growing right along the banks of the creek, with their roots half in the water and half out, or their root system sort of makes the bank of the water. So really cool trees, super water tolerant. They provide a nice amount of shade. It's a fairly large leaf, so you're going to get a pretty dense canopy out of it, but not so dense that you can't grow grass or other plants underneath it, which is kind of nice. I wanted to point out this one right here, which is probably my favorite pear replacement tree. So, again, not a big fan of pears. If they're being replaced because of fire blight or other reasons, this is usually right at the top of my list. It's called American Sentry Linden, and Sentry is S-E-N-T-R-Y, so very nice, tight, upright canopy. Tree gets about 40 feet tall, about 15, maybe 18-ish feet wide, so really tight, upright, pyramidal canopy. It has these really cool sort of heart-shaped leaves. I'll just kind of pick one of those off there. Kind of see that nice heart-shaped leaf. There's a couple holes in the leaf. That is absolutely nothing to worry about. As I mentioned before, it's a native tree. You're going to get a little munching. That's not anything to be concerned about. And this tree flowers in the summertime. It gets a nice little yellow flower in July, which kind of has a nice fragrance. It's attractive. It's not, showy like a magnolia or a redbud, but it's very lovely. And it is fragrant. And it is also resistant to Japanese beetles. I can't talk about shade trees without talking about my favorite. I absolutely love the tulip tree. So the tulip tree has this really cool leaf that looks like sort of like a mitten with two thumbs. It's a large leaf. Here's some really pretty ones over here. So you've got this really unique leaf on it, fairly large. It'll get even bigger as the tree matures and is in the ground and happier than, being out in the root ball. But it's very fast growing. They can grow 36 inches a year once they get themselves established. When they get a little older, not so much at this age, but when they get to be about 5 or 6 inches in trunk diameter, they will start blooming. The blooms come out end of May, first part of June. It's a beautiful greeny orange, yellowy orange colored tulip-shaped flower. The honeybees and some certain flies and different things pollinate, gather pollen off of them. So it's great for the pollinators. It's also a host plant for the eastern tiger swallowtail butterfly. So that's one of my favorite butterflies. They're black and yellow. If you're unfamiliar with them, check it out. The eastern tiger swallowtail butterfly. So the caterpillar, though, can only feed on certain plants. So the adult tiger swallowtail will land on a tulip tree. It will lay eggs. The eggs will hatch into the larva, which is the caterpillar, which is kind of a cool green caterpillar. And it'll do a little bit of munching. It will not damage the tree at all. And then it'll turn into chrysalis and then eventually back into a big, beautiful butterfly. So really cool tree, fast growing, upright profile. Average landscape size is going to be about 30 to 50 tall, about 20 to 25 wide. This is probably the best example of how looking on the internet you can get some bad advice. You can look online and they will tell you that a tulip tree will get 175 to 250 feet tall. That is absolutely true. In the mountains of North Carolina, in some hidden valleys that have been untouched by man for hundreds and hundreds or thousands of years, there are tulip trees that are 200 feet tall. That is never going to happen in St. Charles, Illinois. Maybe 50 feet tall, but absolutely beautiful trees. Golden yellow, bright golden yellow fall color, really cool flowers, native, hardy, excellent tree. My favorite at the moment is this one right over here. It's called Redpointe Maple. Redpointe, so when I started in the industry, the gold standard for red maples, Acer rubrum, the gold standard was Red Sunset. Everybody grew it. It was one of the most commonly grown shade trees, but unfortunately it had two problems. It was prone to chlorosis, which I talked about before, and it was prone to root girdling, which I talked about before. So those two things made it a beautiful but short-lived tree. It would typically live for about 30 years. Obviously, that's not short, but we'd love our trees to live longer than that. Now, just in the last, 10 or 20 years, J. Frank Schmidt Nursery on the West Coast, which is a plant propagating nursery. It's one of our partners. We've been working with them for over 50 years. And they developed this tree right here, which is called the Redpointe Maple. 45-ish feet tall, 30-ish feet wide, very nice upright pyramidal habit. Much more tolerant of our alkaline soils here so that it resists those chlorosis problems that plagued Red Sunset. It also seems to be a more vigorous tree with a more widespread root system, which will resist that root girdling issue that I was mentioning. So excellent shade tree. Nice, dense canopy, bright red fall color, tough as nails, really. It can handle just about everything. Wet soils, dry soils, whatever you can throw at it, it can handle. So I really like Redpointe Maple. We have a ton of different maples available, but we can't go through all of them. We could probably do an entire talk just on the different types of maples we have. But I did want to talk about Redpointe because it is one of my favorites. So again, there are so many different options here. I just wanted to show you a few of my favorites. We are always happy to talk shade trees. It's one of our favorite topics here at Wasco. It's what got us started in the business. Back in 1925, it was shade trees that got things started. And, here we are almost 100 years later, and we still love to talk about shade trees. It's what we do. It's what we grow. So feel free to come by, talk to us about that. If you're having issues with chlorosis at home on older trees, if you've got trees that are being root girdled or they're just old or they've got storm damage, we can talk to you about replacement options, what would grow best in your location. Again, there are so many different options here. I just wanted to show you a few of my favorites. We are always happy to talk shade trees. It's one of our favorite topics here at Wasco. It's what got us started in the business. Back in 1925, it was shade trees that got things started. And, here we are almost 100 years later, and we still love to talk about shade trees. It's what we do. It's what we grow. So feel free to come by, talk to us about that. If you're having issues with chlorosis at home on older trees, if you've got trees that are being root girdled or they're just old or they've got storm damage, we can talk to you about replacement options, what would grow best in your location.